Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. My guest today is Stuart Christoph. Second time he's been on. He is the CEO of the Tocwex Syndicate, and as a part of that syndicate, he is building Fund. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Stuart. I think it's fun. I'm maybe a returning guest. This is take two from almost 2 years ago when we first started talking about kind of the crazy world that we're living in.
Yeah, and it's changed so much, and I love the background for the listeners who won't see this on YouTube. There's an American flag. There's an AR. Is it an AR-15 or is it another type of gun?
Yep, there's AR-15.
Okay, AR-15. Are there other types of ARs?
Yes, there's definitely like a broad assortment of them. The AR-15 is definitely the most well known,
Uh,
but
and
yeah,
then
there are many.
and then also a whiteboard. And so this will give us plenty to talk about just in there. But then there's also the Urbit stuff and there's the fun stuff. And okay, so before we go into this deep dive, what is Tocwex Syndicate and what is Fund?
Yes, I mean, I think, on my last appearance about 2 years ago, I was listening to this last night just to be like, what did we talk about? Uh, and I made the claim that 2 years from now, we will be able to build businesses on Urbit.
Hmm.
And so Talkwex Syndicate is that. We're building tools for building businesses on Urbit. Um, the idea with Fund is how do we give sovereign communities the minimum viable platform for a market economy?
Hmm.
So how do you have a way to propose work? How do you have a way to commit funds, manage disputes, and settle payment, right? These are kind of the fundamental building blocks of having a market economy.
Hmm.
You have this, if you go and buy a sandwich, the the work that's being proposed is like, hey, here's the menu and here's the sandwiches we sell. You're committing the funds by saying, hey, I would like to buy this sandwich. You eat the sandwich and then they give you the bill and you settle a payment. So like all of this happens in very small scale in your daily life, but also happens in much longer time frames. Say if you're doing a contract project for $10,000, you might propose something, go back and forth on the exact scope of something. Your client might sign up and say, like, sign on the dotted line. Yes, I will pay you if you do this work. There's some mechanism for managing disputes and settling payment. Um, and so there's a whole, we can go deep on any one of those, but the idea is like really putting that back into the hands of communities, because right now, if you're trying to do those things, you're dependent on, money that maybe you don't trust or is getting inflated away, dispute resolution systems that are not well intentioned. The list goes on.
Okay, it's brilliant because it brings so many themes that I've been investigating both in this Crazy Wisdom show and also my personal life as I've been trying to manage this system. And it's so interesting because I get to talk to Argentines as well, and Argentines all want to escape their system, but their system almost works better than ours will in the future. Right now, our system works reasonably well. But I can see it. I'm sure you can see it. I can, like, my bank just got swallowed up by Chase Bank, and in that process, a whole bunch of crazy things happened, and so I can see it now, and that mixed with the political stuff coming in, which we have the example of the Canadian truckers getting put outside of the system because of their political beliefs. It's been happening a lot in the United States. The tech world itself does a lot of it. YouTube does a lot of it. Airbnb does a lot of it. And so like the whole system is just starting to creak and crack, and I can feel it, and it's been having effects on me. And then I talk to these Argentines, they're like, what, are you crazy? Like, your system is the best. And it's like, no, you don't get it. You don't get it. It's all, it worked in the 1960s. It worked from, maybe 1920 to today. And now it's starting to crack. But then, and I've also been investigating this because other people are trying to do this, and other people are trying to do this on chain. And they're trying to do it on the Ethereum network with smart contracts and Chainlink. I talked to the Chainlink guys, and I'm starting to see that Chainlink might be the competitor Urbit. And because they're trying to do it at a different way, which involves Oracle networks and other types of things. What's your take on everything I just said? There's a lot.
So I'll start at the end because I think it's really fascinating. I've got a phrase that I've been using lately. every Urbit an oracle, every Urbit a credit rating agency. Um, and so the idea here is like you have an interesting linkage between an Urbit identity and the blockchain, right? Because your Urbit ID is cryptographically owned by you, you can make claims that are backed by this identity. And you could imagine, posting those to chain or otherwise interacting with a smart contract as this identity to make some sort of claim. I think what much of the crypto world gets a little bit hung up on is this idea of trustlessness. I think we talked about this last time. This is like my long running rant in the world is like, hey, trustlessness is useful for some things, but actually you really do want trusted relationships. You want trusted peers. There are a bunch of things that you can do with trust that you can't do with trustlessness. It just is pretty critical. But what you can do with trusted identities, putting information on chain, is you can have trusted oracles, right? This isn't to say, hey, I couldn't lie to you, or it's impossible, or this data is extremely verified. It's, hey, Stuart Alsop has said this claim about the world, and I'm going to trust him for it to be true.
Yeah.
And so, I think there's some evolution here and sort of places where we can replace trust and where, blockchains have essentially done that really well. Going back to kind of the four pillars of a market economy, crypto is really good for committing funds and settling payment, right? Like that's basically its killer use case. It is really not that great for proposing work, frankly, just because it's expensive to put data on the chain, right? You don't actually need to do that.
Yeah.
It's not a good communication channel. Like there's sort of a bunch of reasons why you wouldn't want to do that step like fully on chain.
Yep.
And then it's really bad at this sort of step of like assessing work or managing disputes, because fundamentally the blockchain is a computer program that everything needs to be specified in advance. And the way that we do work, like if you're doing anything novel or new, it fundamentally is not specified in advance.
Interesting.
And so if you want to do new things, you need to have trusted relationships that can handle those edge cases that you just couldn't have specified in advance. And so like that's the way I think about a lot of this of, sure, you can start to put stuff on chain. You can start to do a lot of interesting things with zero knowledge proofs, but they can't do everything. And this is where like the crypto world kind of wanders away and loses me. It's like, this is why you need trusted relationships. Zero knowledge proofs, they're going to do a lot of cool stuff. They're great for proving that you did do something. They cannot prove that you did not do something in the past.
Wait, why?
And well, because you can't prove a negative. Right? Like that just won't happen, right? Like you could do it outside of the system. Like, sure, you could prove that some contained system has worked in some way.
Interesting.
But you can't prove that something didn't happen outside of the system. And then the other thing you can't do is prove that you will do something, right? You can't prove something about the future. And those are two like killer use cases for why you need trust. Is you want to be able to know to some reasonable degree of certainty that someone didn't screw you over, tell your secrets, whatever else, or that they're going to follow through on what they said they would do. And so, there's an interesting dynamic there, and I think that's where building these sort of trusted relationships is really important. And like we could, I'll throw that back to you because I know I've just said a lot now.
Yeah. Well, okay. So yeah, and there's something that hit me early on because what you mentioned about Urbit being identity based, that seems to be the key changer. Is that I have a Urbit, that Urbit is mine. I control that Urbit. Whereas if I analyze the Ethereum to Chainlink kind of world, that is wallet based. not identity based, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of interesting work going into like the crypto space of like what are identities. You've got ENS domains that a lot of people are using. There's some interesting work with ERC 6551, which is Ethereum improvement protocol proposal to do um, token bound accounts. So imagine a wallet controlled by an NFT so that it has a little
Oh.
bit more of an identity to it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Urbit IDs can make use of that, right? So you can get that same benefit from the Urbit ERC 721 token.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but a lot of those systems don't have the other pieces, right? Like your identity is not just your driver's license. Your identity is your driver's license, the person it represents, the relationships you have, the communication, the ways to reach you, all of these other things. And so even, a bunch of the people that are leaning into, say, ENS domains as an identity, like that might identify your wallet,
Mm.
but am I still DMing you on Twitter? Like, are you going to get deplatformed from your Kickstarter for your trucker protest? Like whatever the list goes on. And to me, like those things that you own are your identity. And if you can't actually own it, like, is it really yours? Is it your identity? Can someone else take it and spoof it? And they're like, oh,
Mm.
I'm a angry Twitter employee and I've taken over Stuart's Twitter handle, and you know now I'm just ranting about how Argentina is gonna collapse because reasons.
Yeah. So, okay, this is really interesting. It gets into really fundamental territory of how do we know who to trust. And then somebody made this excellent point, which I think is accurate, which is that the Scandinavian countries, the more farther north you go, they're more trusted societies, but they're also less socially adept. So, like if you go to Scandinavian countries, you're not going to get very warm hospitality. If you
Mhm.
go to the south, and if you go to Arabic countries, you go to India, you go to Thailand, you go to Argentina and Brazil, uh, people become really warm, but you cannot trust people. And I don't mean that there aren't Argentines or Brazilians that you can trust. There are definitely people you can trust, but the culture itself is not trustable. That you can't really trust people with your wallet, which is in some cases is really wrong because like in Thailand, you can't like they're actually I've dropped my wallet many times and in places in Brazil. It just happened to me recently where the Uber driver actually drove back and gave me so like it's not a full on thing, but in general, there's something there. And now with the United States, it's really interesting because we had a high trust society. Well, actually, there's a good question for you. Do you still think that in the United States there is a high trust society?
Um, Maybe. Like I think in pocket, like I think basically, culturally, politically, you have a lot of fragmenting. And you can say this is the fault of running the money printer, and people can't trust that their
Mm,
money will be there in the future because even if they put it in a bank, it's not going to buy them what it used to. And so like when you start to not have like a good measure of
institutions.
things,
Yeah.
like your understanding of the world starts to break down, and you're
Yeah.
like, okay, whoa, like what's going on? And I think like this is why the crypto world has rightly sort of recoiled about this concept of trust, right?
Mm,
It's like we want trustless money, we want, you know, trustless communication channels, like kind of all of these things, because there have been these middlemen, these institutions in between us and, you know, our values in some sense. Um, and those institutions, gained that trust in the past,
mm,
probably for good reasons,
yeah.
and now have just totally, defiled it. And people are looking for a way out. Like the issue with trust is not, hey, that you can have a trusted relationship. And even we want institutions we can trust because frankly, you can't go and do all of the research
Yeah.
yourself. I don't
Yep.
want to. I
Yep.
want to be able to trust the
Someone.
CDC
Yeah. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
all of these places, but they have lost that
Yeah.
trust,
Yeah. And they can't get it back.
and they can't get back. And you need to be able to like hot swap in a new institution, right? I don't want to throw out the entirety of the road system, right? It's good. I want to use the pathways, all of this stuff. But the Department of Transportation, I do not trust them to fix the potholes, like all of these other things. Like the
Yeah.
institution, I want to get rid of,
Yeah.
while the infrastructure, can
Oh,
get
but this
used.
is interesting because this has showed up many times, which is that anytime there was a political infrastructure that went crazy, the prime examples are the Nazis, but not only the Nazis as well. That's actually happened within the Soviet Union, because you had Stalin, who was not the best of people, but he was an excellent political administrator, and he essentially centralized the Soviet Union, and he said no to world communism. He said, screw that. I'm a Georgian. I'm going to trust my Russian brothers here. We're going to create this centralized system. And then once he died, then the Soviet Union was left with this problem of how do we create, and then by the 80s, it had become untenable. And this whole centralized system that Stalin had set up was now gone. You had absolute corruption, and so it happened in Germany, it happened in Japan, in the United States went and just completely. But you can't find the effective administrators because all the effective administrators had been tainted by their relationship with the previous one who had gone crazy. What do you think about that as what we're talking about?
Yeah, so like the way that I think about this is sort of, and like the way that we're trying to kind of solve for it with fund, and
Yeah.
maybe to talk towards a more recent uh you know political happening, let's say, is you know back a few years ago now, I guess there were trucker protests in Canada, and people are trying to crowdfund for their protest. um they get shut down, and not only because the institution that they're trying to crowdfund on does not want them to do it, but also because that institution, that judge, that person who's there to settle the disputes about, hey, are these funds being used for the thing you said you would do, all that, they also did not get to use the same infrastructure, right? So there was an institutional value that was layered on to be an infrastructure requirement, right? Because why couldn't you crowdfund from your local community to do a thing, right? That a separate community doesn't think you should get to do.
Mm.
Uh, so this is a little bit what we're trying to do with fund is, can we separate the institution, the piece that handles disputes, handles edge cases, handles the changing world, from the infrastructure that does the
Yeah.
base level protocol behavior, right? Like Kickstarter, base level protocol behavior is we take payments from a bunch of people and we give it to whoever it said it should go to.
Yep.
Kickstarter also they run the website that does the publishing, they run, any dispute handling, they have some trust and safety team, they have all of these things.
Yeah.
So they all of those are bundled into one thing. So we're saying, hey, unbundle those.
Yeah. Great.
We're giving you the infrastructure, right? You can take this code, you can run it yourself, you can put up whatever work you want to propose. Like we are entirely unopinionated about what you're going to raise money for, or how you're going to raise it, whatever. And what you do is you choose from your community the people that are handling the disputes, the people that are saying, hey, this work got done well, or it did not.
And now, is this only limited to people who are on Urbit already, or can people outside of Urbit also use this?
Yep. So people outside of Urbit can start to use it, right? So the basic mechanism here is, as someone who's wanting to fund some project, you can propose the work, You can describe it, set out a few milestones, how much each of those are going to cost, and then it's on you to go and find what we call a trusted oracle. This
Oh,
is a counterparty that is going to assess your work completion, and it is limited to Urbit stars.
okay, got it.
And so these Urbit stars are a service provider to you that are basically just providing their reputation as a trusted community member to say, I am going to be a fair judge of whether this work was done well or not.
Yep.
You put up your fund, it gives you a clear web page that anyone without Urbit, anyone with Ethereum wallet can come and connect to and donate to your.
That's what I wanted to know. Okay. Yeah. So I'm glad you answered that, because that gave me a much better understanding of what it is. So somebody can start the thing. In order to start the thing, they need to be probably already in Urbit. They probably already need to know people with stars. But they can collect donations via crypto from anyone outside of there. Okay. And then so I want to go back to the infrastructure versus institution kind of question then, because the infrastructure will then be created. And so we've got crypto, which is the base layer, the payment layer, and then we've got Urbit, which is the layer of all the other infrastructure that has to do with validating in our subjective world whether that happened. And then it sort of creates a place for institutions to be developed, but without any but it's like the layer at which, like, so there can be leftist institutions as well that use this, and there can be there can be non-political institutions. It's just like it's separating those things. And it's so interesting because it goes back to this question which we've been struggling with as the information has become free in the 1990s with the internet. And I was just reading about in the Steve Jobs biography yesterday about how Apple had to figure this out for themselves as well. And it was so interesting because it was a political cartoonist who wanted to create an app in the App Store when the iPhone came out. And Steve Jobs is clearly on the left. And they would have stopped everything from the right, but this was a leftist who was making fun of George Bush. And then he got a Pulitzer or something like that. So he got the leftist stamp of approval on it. And then all of a sudden it caused a crazy in battle between this. And because at first Apple wanted to say no porn, no political brouhahas, and then one other one which I can't remember. Nothing that would harm people. And this is what it hit, was that nothing that would defame somebody. And this political cartoonist was making political cartoons about George W. Bush. And so it's just such a fascinating thing. And then we have Twitter, which then, was first an anarcho-capitalist type of thing with Jack, and then got swallowed up into the machine, the neoliberal machine of tech. And then all of a sudden turned into a weapon of the state. And then Elon Musk comes and turns it into his own weapon, like a weapon of Elon Musk, no longer a weapon of the state, but it's definitely a weaponized still. And then it's just such a weird place where we're in right now. And it feels like what you're building could potentially be the solution for institutions in the future, but maybe far in the future, to kind of grow up. But it feels like we're going to have a crazy time in the next 100 years where it's just going to be sort of weird. It's going to be really weird. What do you think?
Yeah, like I think, part of the way I like to think about this is just like, do you actually own your tools?
Yeah. Interesting.
No one goes and like blames DeWalt if you use, your impact driver to put together, a trailer, and then you back into a school bus. Like, you're like, no one no one's gonna take that and be like, DeWalt, no, you're horrible and we need to, cancel you or something. But like there is this weird emergent thing kind of like coming out of the tech space where like people expect
interesting
the technology to be a
values,
sensor,
to have
right?
values,
To have values. I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And like, I don't I don't think that's good. And not because it isn't possible that some tech has good values and some tech has bad values or whatever else, but I think, as
Yeah.
humanity, we get to the right place by everyone being able to properly follow their own values. So
Mm,
this is a little bit of my aversion to like huge companies is like if you're in a 500,000 person company and half of those people or more, I mean, frankly, probably everyone is doing something 3% off of their moral center because they're like, I've got this thing, I've got that thing, you have to
yeah.
settle, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
sure, it's just 3%, whatever. You
Yeah.
can go from, hey, I'm pointed in a good direction to like the entire
Without
institution.
you, yeah, yeah, without anyone realizing it until it's too late because everybody's getting a paycheck.
Right. It's like, how easy is it for me to hold a hammer and like not hit someone with it? Like
Yeah.
really easy, you know?
Yeah.
How easy is it for you to like use Twitter and tweet something out that doesn't then get put
Mm,
into the algorithm and stuck to some person that's in some particular mind state where like that thing that you said is going to be interpreted in a less than intended way, and like the wheels just fall off the bus. So it's like, how do we take all of those tools, put them back into the hands of the people in the community? So like, for all of your listeners that kind of don't know fully about Urbit yet, it is a open source software project where you run your own software.
mm,
And so like when we're building something, we are handing it off and it is yours to do what
mm,
you will with it. We
mm.
can't come in and say, hey, we don't like what you're crowdfunding something about. I expect that people will crowdfund things that I don't
Disagreeing
like.
with, yeah, yeah, yeah.
But you know what? Like
That's the
it's
price.
that's the price I'm like, and
Yeah.
I think that that's good. Like people
Yeah.
should be able to do things that I
Yeah.
disagree with,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because like we're as humanity, we're doing this sort of like exploration of the idea space of like,
Yeah.
what doesn't, what, you know, and people should be able to do that.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because that's the fundamental question we're being faced with, and almost when it comes down to it, basically it's really hard for everyone to allow that to happen. And like the default thing is always to go back to the authoritarian position because it's like deals with control, it deals with identity, it deals with the political, and the political is so challenging because it's like when things get political. I think it was some jurist, I'm forgetting the name of the guy, but he was a Nazi jurist, but all the leftists were also reading him, because this brings into mind of the zeitgeist of our time is that whoever is in the zeitgeist, you're paying attention to them regardless of who they are, like whether it's left or right. Like, and so the political is very much like it gets political when someone does something that affects your identity, and not the identity that you're aware of, it's the identity that you're unaware of. And so like the unconscious identity, it's like the point at which somebody is like asking you a question about your deepest beliefs, and then you actually, like, without even thinking about it, it becomes a life or death situation where you pull out the gun and like you actually go and do that thing, and you do that with a group of people. It's like your political beliefs are, yeah. It sounds like you have a question, or it sounds like you have something to say.
Like, yeah, so like not to get like too philosophical or anything on this.
Yeah.
Like I know we mentioned like the AR on the walls. Like I'm a very peaceful person.
Yeah.
I want other people to be able to run their lives the way they do. Like I'm very open-minded. I have a way that I'm living my life. Like, everyone can do their own thing. And I think we've gotten into this world where we've gotten so far afield from like the idea of, where political power comes from. Like,
Ooh.
what was it Mao that said political power springs from the barrel of a
Yeah.
gun?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
people have stopped recognizing that like their exertion of political power is like an outsourced exertion of violence, right? And so people are trying to vote
Ooh.
on everything, right? They're like,
Yeah.
oh, I think this thing is bad, we got to ban people from doing this, we need to do whatever these things, without coming back and saying like, actually, um what is it that I'm doing when I'm voting? Like I am choosing to use violence to impose
Oh,
my
interesting.
my values on other people. It's like, look, maybe you want to use violence to impose your values on other people. Maybe that's one of your values. But I think a lot of people do it mindlessly, and instead should ask themselves sort of this question of like, if they're going to vote for something, would I go and stick this person in a cage for doing this? Would I go and kill this person myself because they're doing something that I, find distasteful or object to or think is like just otherwise not helpful?
Yeah.
Um,
This is
and
such
we've
juicy.
gotten so far away from that, like, what is the political, like, that, people are totally going like, oh, yeah, I'm going to exert power for this reason and that reason, and I need to do it to them before they do it to me, like sort of this whole like rat's nest of like, why is it that everything has become political? Like, why
Yeah.
is it that
Ooh,
you know
interesting.
you can't go to the movies or whatever without people being like, oh, that was a funny movie and I enjoyed it and I can talk about it with whoever. It like inevitably spirals into some political debate because people have this like deep fear of like, oh my gosh, if I don't make my point, someone's going to kill me over our disagreement.
Is very interesting in its juicy territory. Why is it that everything has become political is a very interesting question. There's also you said so that the voting itself eventually runs into the violence question because that's, I believe, our Western forms of government are based on the government has the monopoly on the on violence, and that's a good thing that, like, we've discovered thousands of years, that's a good thing that the government has that, because if not, we're back in the state of nature. But that's
I'll
like,
agree to disagree on that being a good thing, but
yeah, yeah, yeah,
but
yeah. Why?
but I think like the like everything becoming political is kind of a function of uh this monopoly on violence,
Hmm.
right? Like, uh, because the state has actually managed such a total monopoly on the like legitimate initiation of violence in our modern era, we don't have the other mechanisms of dispute resolution that we've used in the past, right? So you could say, um, like there's the state, but there's also culture for influencing people and like guiding their behavior towards other things. There's religion, um, there's peer relationships, and what maybe happened like during the Protestant Reformation, you had like the separation of church and state, or like in some sense, and then you had it again, in the American Revolution. Um, what we're having with crypto is like separation of money and state. And so we're going through another one of these sort of transformations of where are the enforcement mechanisms actually living, and our
Yeah.
culture is trying to figure that out, right? Like, we've spent the last 250 years figuring out what is the separation of church and state. Um, and I think you probably have felt a little bit of like a reversion back to religion. I think the
Well,
atheism curve
so
is changing directions.
so that church of state thing is really interesting. The separation of church and state, most people don't know that's nowhere in the Constitution. So there's nowhere in the Constitution that says there is a separation between the church and state. That's something that got sort of, and I believe it happened in the 90s, and I believe the Democrats are responsible for it, where it's a sort of the secularism. And this probably has relationships to what happened in the 1960s with the New Left, although I haven't fact checked that. If anybody listeners, please fact check it and go into that, because I want to now, which is, so it all comes from one of Thomas Jefferson's letters. One of Thomas and Jefferson's letters says something about the church and state being separate or something like that. And it actually, like, my understanding of the Constitution, it wasn't church separation of church and state. It was limiting the government's ability to interject into questions of religion. And so so it gave freedom of religion. Sounds like you want to say something.
No, no, like not to get like too heady in this, but I
Yeah,
think like this is where like kind of some of these questions of religion and culture are interesting, is like, what is religion? And I think
yeah.
you make a very fair point to say like the left over the last 30 years has extracted its religion from being considered a religion, and therefore
Oh,
allowing it to
interesting.
be a function of the state, right? Like if you think of
The state is the religion.
all the well, the state is the religion, but the religion has taken over the state, right? They've kind of
Yeah,
melded.
yeah,
You've got,
yeah. Interesting.
sort of woke
Yeah,
DEI,
yeah, interesting.
leftist, hyper progressive, you call it the urban monoculture, you call it any number of things, but where it very clearly is a set of uh, deeply held or deeply enforced religious beliefs where, in the same way you might have been shunned or otherwise influenced you know, by the Roman Catholic Church a couple hundred years ago, like you have the same set of rules. Like they aren't the state, but like they certainly influence everything. And it's such a totalizing view on everything that uh, it doesn't get to see that it is a religion, right? It just is.
And you can't bring it up. You can't have a
It is
conversation
the
about
being.
it being a religion because it's the same fundamentalist. Because it like that doesn't happen with all religious people. That happens only with fundamentalist religions, where you can't question them about their religion, and you
Right.
can't say that it's a religion rather than the truth. And that's this so crazy because it goes back to this sort. It's almost like psychological Jungian, like the shadow, where it's like uh, it's you can't even talk about it and you can't even ask about it. And when you're in it, when you're believing in whatever that higher value is, you can't even ask yourself the question. It becomes something that gets put into the shadow, into the unconscious.
Yep.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
I think like it's yeah, how deep are you willing to unwind like
Mm,
the value system that you live within,
yeah.
right? Like this is what I mean by um there's religion, there's culture, there's the state, there's your local communities, there's your business, there's your operational team. Like all of these things go down, and you want to participate in communities that have similar values to you,
Mm,
whatever they may
yeah.
be. uh, and you want your work, your reputation, like all of these things to be judged by those communities and their values,
Interesting.
not the values of some other thing. So it's not to say, leftist values should be banned. It's not to say right-wing values should be
Yeah.
banned. It's not to say any of these things. It's to say, hey, like, can your community, can your culture get to judge your work by whatever values you have? Maybe your culture is, uh, happier to have looser deadlines. So if you you miss the deadlines that you
Yeah.
specify on your work, like your trusted oracle, like the kind of leader of your community will still approve the work because they're like, oh, it was fine or whatever. Maybe your culture is really averse to um, lending. Like
Yeah.
you've got user fees,
Yeah.
and if you're
Yeah.
trying to like crowdfund for something there, like no one in your community is going to fund it. No one in your community is going to put their name behind being a judge for it. They're just going to say like, nope, this isn't okay. But like all of those things are fine, but that doesn't mean that like everyone should be excluded from using this piece of infrastructure. Like, good example, I think, to bring this into like the statist realm is like seatbelt laws. Like I wear my seatbelt all the time
Yeah.
because I don't see a loss for it.
Yeah.
Uh, it's great, and like I want to stay alive in the event of a car accident. But it doesn't really make sense as to why a cop should be able to pull me over and give me a ticket for not having a seatbelt, unless you layer in this sort of like more generalized like nanny state concept of like, oh, well, we're going to have to pay for your emergency room
Yeah.
visit, like all of these other things where you're like, actually, like let that person be a part of a insurance collective or whatever, where
Yeah.
like if you're not wearing your seatbelt and you get in an accident, you go through your windshield, they just like leave you on the side of the road.
Oh,
Right?
interesting.
Like,
Yeah, it was
like
so it's so funny because you went right to the thing that I was thinking, which is the argument I learned 15 years ago, which is that whoever goes into the hospital with emergency thing, that gets put onto the state. And
Right.
now, like now I'm seeing with Malay, and like now I'm really seeing with it Malay compared to every other political thing going on right now. For example, something very timely: all the right parties in Europe just won in landslides, but those right parties are all socialists. They're all just like the right version of the socialist, and they're all trying to increase the power of the state and increase the power of the welfare state. And it makes sense because they're all essentially, the welfare state is a democratic way to buy votes, because you're giving people money, and instead of voting for one political party, they're voting for the whichever political party continues the welfare state. And,
Right. I mean,
yeah,
and yeah, like the European kind of they're dealing with a migration
yeah.
crisis. So like the right wins because they're like, we'll give the money to you and not to the other people. Like,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
whatever. But like it's not this like principled thing where they're like, no, we're not going to help you at
yeah,
all and all of this. It's like, no, actually, we've finally figured out there's a finite amount of money. We
yeah.
can't give
Interesting.
all of the money to everybody. And so now we're going to exclude the people that we don't want to get the money. Like
And the
it's
only country who's currently voting for this is Argentina, and the only reason they're voting for it is they've been dealing with this longer than anyone else has been dealing with it, and they realize like it doesn't work anymore. We've got to have new ideas, and so it's like the only place in the world, like it's literally the only place. The only other country who's tried to do this is Botswana. But actually, like in the 1950s and 1960s, that's the only other example of a libertarian government that's actually gotten control of the government and started to implement. And Botswana does a lot better than its neighbors. But then there are places in the United States that are doing it. It's just not at the federal level. And this is why I'm very optimistic about the United States. And I do want to ask, we'll save the last 5 minutes for kind of like, how can I set something up on fund in order to start testing it? But for the next 10 minutes, let's talk about the United States and federalism and your take on it. Do you think federalism is surviving? And if not, why not?
um I think federalism will survive. I think it's definitely having a really tough time right
Mhm.
now. And like, you know, being the, Bitcoiner that I am, I'll
Yeah.
like, run my gripes. And like, I think the problem's the Federal Reserve and
Yeah.
like the money printer and the fact that we've given so much power to the federal government. And that now people like the fact that people care so much about the president's domestic policies is like a mystery to me. Like you should basically choose like in a
Oh, interesting.
properly functioning federal system where the federal government is not that powerful. Like you should only care about the president to the extent that like his foreign policy matters, right?
Interesting.
Like you're I mean, I think a lot of people figure this out during COVID where they figured out that their local governor, their state governor mattered a whole lot more to what their life was like than the president, right? Like, from August 2020 to July 2021, there was a change of power in the federal government, but like how much did people's lives actually change on the ground between those two,
Hmm.
dates?
That goes
And
back to
much.
my it goes back to my earlier point about being a Californian, and somebody mentioned what COVID was that it was biopolitical. And it wasn't so much political as biopolitical. It was like went right down to the nature of the DNA and disease. And so I started to realize that my main concern was Newsom. Newsom was the main target of my biopolitical, like that guy was responsible for a lot more of it than Biden or Trump was. That's a really interesting point.
Yeah, and so like, and I think we need more of that. And again, they're like
Yeah,
this
yeah,
informs
yeah.
the way that we're building fund is because like
Mm,
you want people to be able to choose these options. Like I moved from Washington State to Idaho
yeah.
during COVID because
Mhm.
I said, "Hey, this stuff that Washington is doing, I don't like. I am going to leave. I'm going to, act out my values in a separate way." And like that's good. I think you might want to have options where uh there's some state that's doing insane totalitarian
That's the
lockdowns
whole
for
that's the whole point. That was the whole point of
right.
federalism, is that you can do that. You can move different states, and then even different counties have different laws and such.
Yeah, but I think like what you want is to try and get as much of those as much of that optionality in the digital sphere as
Yes,
you
exactly.
can,
Yeah.
because it makes it so that you don't have to worry as much geographically where you are,
Mm.
right?
Oh,
You
interesting.
have optionality.
Because all of the money is now digital, most of the institutions, most of the actual things that are happening are all digital. Then what's left in the physical world?
Like, I mean, you just get if you can put it into the digital, you have a lower cost of switching,
Mm.
which means that you can have faster iterations towards better solutions, right? I mean,
Mm.
this is why SaaS won out over, shipping CDs places. They're able to iterate faster on, how do I give you a more addictive news feed, or, whatever the SaaS tool of choice is. Because they didn't have to do stuff in the physical world, they could iterate faster. Now, you don't want to do everything in the physical world,
Mm.
but for the things that you can offload to the digital, hey, you know, we've got some dispute about this work contract. Um, why in the world would we, if we're doing all of the work digitally, hey, I'm going to deliver this presentation, I'm going to write this book, whatever the thing is. If there's some dispute, be like, okay, well, there was an arbitration clause in our contract that we would use a New York City arbiter, even though,
Mm.
I'm in Idaho, you're in Buenos
Yeah,
Aires.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting.
Now we both need to like fly to New York City to do some in-person arbitration thing. And you're like, well, that's insane. Like, we don't need to do, like, what are all of these things that we don't need to do in the physical world? Let's do those digitally. And then in the physical world, like, do the stuff that we need to do physically: touch grass, enjoy the sun, hang out on the river,
Yeah.
drink beers with our friends,
Yeah.
whatever the whole set of things is, because then we can put more of our resources into the physical world to do things we like, than, get
So
wrapped up
is fund competing with like, or a better way to say it, is fund offering another alternative to that that arbitration thing? Is that the specific thing, or but there's multiple layers to it? But is the arbitration the most important?
I think that piece is the most important, right? It makes uh, dispute resolution much more accessible to a much broader swath of people, particularly who are working in a global context.
Mm.
You know, if you come along and you're trying to hire a smart contract dev in Dubai, and he's totally pseudonymous to you
Yeah,
because he
yeah,
wants to be, because of whatever reasons,
yeah, yeah,
uh, how do you actually, like, how does he know that you're going to pay him? You guys might not know what country each other are in. Like, there's a whole swath of these questions of, you know cyberspace enforcement mechanisms that, like, the legacy court system and arbitration system just like is entirely ill-equipped to manage. But then also where like the crypto world is, again, wrapped up in this like trustless and
yeah, yeah,
pre-enforcement
yeah,
act
yeah, got it.
thing, where
Yeah.
you're like, actually, you can't do new things if you need to define all of the things before you do the things.
Okay,
Which is
so
what.
this gets into my question of like how, so I'm interested in, because it feels like so far all I've been able to do with Inurbit is basically message people. It's a social network. It's way better than it was 2 years ago, the last time we spoke. And this feels like the first test that I can use it for. How can I actually set it up and get started, and like and well, what would be the best thing to fund first? Is it a work contract? We're having an AI conference down here we're having a conference down in Argentina in October, probably late October. So that might actually be the something related to that we could do basically.
Cool. Well, we might be clashing for attendees, although if you're doing the AI stuff. So I was gonna say, you can totally use it for that. We are using it to crowdfund or slash like sell tickets
Yeah.
to a conference up in the Pacific Northwest
What
in the
day?
United States, October 20th and 21st.
Okay, so we'll try
Running a
to.
sub-assembly conference. The whole topic is going to be like trust, identity, reputation systems, and we'll have it's going to be like kind of very limited access, but a really kind of fun
Maybe we
set
should.
of activities.
Maybe we should do it October like. Is this when is assembly?
As far as I know, there is not going to be a major assembly this
Okay.
year, and
Yeah.
so actually separate communities are going to be running these like sub-assembly
Oh, got it.
events.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay, so
it'll,
if
it'll
we so and our conference is only going to be one day, so let me actually just get the calendar out here. Look in October. Okay, great. Yeah, so we'll maybe the 20 I'll figure that out later. The 26th. Is that would
oh,
that
cool.
yeah, okay, so 26th.
That's
Yeah.
like yeah, like the next week.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So October 26th is likely going to be our conference. Won't interfere with that. So what can we do to actually like get it up on Fund?
Yep. So you basically only need kind of two parts. So one is who is the project worker? Like who is the person responsible for getting the work done? That person, in conjunction with whomever else, kind of out of band of the application, can define the scope of the project, and you can say, hey, we need 20 grand. Here are the milestones. It's going to be these 4 steps, and like the way that we're going to do it is like we're going to define the scope of the project, and then basically anyone who contributes, $500 to the fund will get a ticket to the event. So then the last part of it would be you would need to choose an Urbit star, and certainly like Tocwex Syndicate, we run our own. We'd be willing to do it, but a better solution is kind of like someone from
Someone
your
else.
community
Yeah. Yeah.
will
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
there, like
Yeah.
someone who can judge, like, hey, did Stuart actually like throw a good conference, or did he
Ah,
run
interesting.
off with the money and
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
do whatever? And then you need an Urbit star, and you'll select that identity. It kind of is a permissionless institution building system where anyone can come along and they can have an Urbit star and they can create their own value system, right? So someone from your community, someone local to you, perhaps, whatever, you would select to be your trusted oracle, and you and them would negotiate between yourselves. Hey, what are the expectations here? At what point do these funds get released? What is the dispute resolution details that we will do if there's some issue? And then what's nice is everyone that contributes to the fund can see who that trusted oracle is, so they can make an assessment of whether they think that identity is has a good reputation, all of these things. But also, if they've got their own Urbit, they can reach out to that person. They can say, whoa,
Mm.
whoa, whoa, I contributed this $400, and then Stuart didn't let me in the door. He kicked me out because he thought my hat looked
Mm.
stupid or whatever else. And so they can actually like, start to have access to this broader dispute resolution system that isn't just like icing you out.
Oh, got it. Okay, because that's where that's where the arbitration comes in. So for the last few minutes, what are the arbitration? Because this is hard. This definitely
Yep.
seems like it's hard territory because it's the same thing you said earlier, which is that whenever you do something new, but I guess you aren't doing something new because you're doing something that the arbitration thing already has happened. We've already gotten good ideas on arbitration.
Yeah, like the way that we are kind of like narrowing this down, because again,
Mm.
we want to be
Yeah.
unopinionated about
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
things. Like, I don't want to say, hey, the arbitration team is actually going to be a panel of 9 judges and a simple majority, and who knows whether you want to add more judges if you gain more power in your community, whatever.
Yeah.
Like that is not the fight I want to get into.
Yeah.
Where we're going is like just a very slim waist for the infrastructure layer, for the protocol layer, which is to say that trusted oracle makes the decision at this point for this version of the software for, does the person get paid, or do all of the contributors get a refund? Right?
Uh,
That They
got it.
just make the
Yeah.
binary decision. This is the part that happens on chain, but because everyone has
The
a
ability to go.
communication
Yeah.
network, an identity, all of this, the trusted oracle can say to the broader community, hey, actually, the way that we handle disputes for our community, for our projects, there's a panel of three
Got it.
other
Got it.
people,
Okay.
and we are going to look at the work in a particular way, and what we have to do is come to a unanimous decision between all three of us in order to release the funds or issue a refund.
Cool.
Uh,
Okay.
so like definitely leaving it in the hands of communities to say, you guys handle your own disputes.
And then you'll be building a reputation score for the stars participating in this?
Yeah, we'll actually be just building what we're calling kind of a subjective reputation graph for everyone. If you imagine there's a whole swath of different data points that come from different types of participation in a project. Some of this is on-chain, right? You can see people's on-chain contributions. You can see who got paid out. You can see whether a project got canceled and refunded, but you can't see any of the other data on-chain. So you don't actually know what the project was about. There's not a inherent strict on-chain linkage between wallets that fulfilled some payment or an identity. That can exist if you want it to, but you could also donate anonymously. And so what you start to get is a subjective understanding of what you know about another person's economic activity. But you don't necessarily have total information about all of their participation, right? So you could look on chain, you can see all of the projects or all of the revenue that went through the system. But you don't actually, unless you knew about the project and your Urbit, has the data, had access to the data, has other pieces of alpha about any given project, you might only know, okay, a $10,000 project raised money and got done.
I got it.
Know what it was for.
It's basically because what Uber did was really interesting. What Uber did was they took the middle management layer of taxi medallion services, and then they took that and they outsourced it to both the drivers and the riders. And the riders could give reviews on the drivers could give you reviews on the riders, and that review system replaced it all. It works reasonably well, but that only works for one specific thing of taking it Uber, which is not the hardest thing to figure out. It's not like paying somebody for a development job with all these, there's all these other things. So it's basically, and so you're building a system to understand that as well over time.
Right. Yeah. So you'll understand. We'll probably build a system for aggregate scoring that will be subjective to you. So I know a bunch of things about your reputation from your friends, from your whatever. So I have some social credit score for you.
Yeah.
That is based on what I know about you. Yeah. It's not a centralized Opticon, thing. Yeah. It's all have that, but then I'll also be able to look at the information that I know about you. I'm like, okay, I see that, Stuart's done this many projects. I can see the project details for 3 of them. I donated to 2 of them. Okay, now I have some emergent understanding of our relationship and how trustworthy and what your reputation is like.
That's really cool. Well, okay, so how can people participate in this? How can they find out more about what you're working on?
Yeah, so the simple, easy way to do it is to go to tocwexsyndicate.com. That's TOCWEXSYNDICATE.com, or follow us on Twitter at Tocwex. From there, you'll be able to find kind of our website's presence guides for how to get on Urbit and get using Fund. And then from there, just shoot us a message and say, hey, I'm I'm trying to crowdfund a project. I'm trying to work in a global knowledge worker capacity. I'm really interested in how to set up new systems of dispute resolution, and we'll help you get sorted.
Cool. Thank you so much.